Hello everyone, I want to talk about what woke really means, mainly because thanks to the anti-woke grifter crowd and the far left, it means nothing. If you ask someone who's anti-woke, they'll tell you that, oh, it just means forced diversity. And even then, their own definition of it is so flimsy that it's basically non-existent. And for the left, they will just say, okay, define woke, bro. Define woke, bro. Just like Destiny. Like, like basically, just imagine Destiny on his little cuck chair, and then there's you saying, "Hey, look at you, you're a cuck," and he'll be like, "What's cuck mean, bro? Define it, bro." Because he's that much of a fucking cuckold that he cannot even accept the reality. But anyway, back to what the term means. It basically means communism. That's really it. It is Marxism in the style of propaganda. That is what woke means. And you can see it with how they depict characters in woke media, more specifically the women, because to see beautiful characters implies that, well, the little lie known as equality is not real and will never even exist because, as I said, it's a lie. It is a straight up lie, and there can only be hierarchy. That's really it. And beauty standards are also a form of hierarchy. The much more beautiful you are, the much more desired you'll be, and the much more uglier you are, the much less people, well, will the desire to want you as a mate. And then there's the fact that, especially when it comes to male characters, and of course me and the audience watching this video, whenever we see a muscular male character, it inspires us to get into shape and become something more than we are already, and that is also something that they don't like because woke media, especially once you take a look at it on a more deeper level, is really just a form of demoralization and a humiliation ritual. They want you to be a nihilistic, defeatist type of person that can never even rebel against something that is horrendous. They want you to quite literally live up to what Nietzsche described as the last man. And they do it by putting those said beautiful characters in more perverse forms of media. Because they won't allow you to look at more beautiful looking characters that can pretty much inspire you to become something more than you are now. And they will replace them with ugly characters. But they'll put them in something like pornography, where when you do look at it, it's just stripping away at your vitality, because what does porn do to you? Nothing good, that's for sure. And we all know why. You can't exactly name the actors, but we all know why. All I can tell you is to look up people such as Al Goldstein, Sam Roth, and Ralph Bakshi. That's all I can tell you. And we can all see the effects of it in terms of the media, because the only reason why people such as V or Deranged Doomer even care about those said, quote, beautiful characters is because they're gooners. They're quite literally proof as to why you should never goon. And now we shall talk about the more subversive storytelling elements. One of the elements that I don't really see being mentioned within more left-wing pieces of media that are subversive with exception to people such as Type 2 Productions, it's the radical individualist elements of their storytelling, because communists, as collectivists, understand the pros and cons behind their own ideological worldview. And one of the pros behind collectivism is organizing a group. So, in order to make sure that the opposition doesn't form any genuine forms of resistance, they have to make sure that they do not organize in any shape or form. So, they push hyper-individualist propaganda in their storytelling as a way to prevent that. And you can tell just by looking at more older films. Again, I recommend watching Type 2 Productions on their videos on Shrek, Megamind, Ratatouille, and of course Mulan. And that's why I don't really trust the more so libertarian ideologies and worldviews. And this goes exactly the same with the more non-denominational types. Either you're a Christian or, in my case, a pagan. Doesn't matter. If you are non-denominational, you fell for the trap. And with libertarianism, it just goes to show that a lot of things can be psyoped into becoming controlled opposition. That's why I tend to think that, yeah, libertarianism does have some good points, but it is not the end all be all in terms of ideology. It's really not. Then there's the more communistic elements in the propaganda, and we all know why they push it. It's to propagandize people like you and me, and of course many others throughout the world, to become communist. And the reason why this is so bad is because of the history of communism itself, and because communism is so hyper-collectivist to the point where it actively requires you to sacrifice your individuality in order to fit in with the collective. But I also do not recommend hyper-individualism, because it requires you to sacrifice your community in order to become a jaguar. We are humans, not jaguars nor ants. We are humans. We are built for both individuality and community, not either one. Now, it's time to talk about the more, well, schizo elements, but really this is not really schizo, but nowadays they would definitely call you schizo, but if it was a decade ago, they would absolutely agree with you. The erasure of European history. We've all seen it in woke media. Either it was God of War Ragnarok, basically any British Netflix show that's made today. Like you can name one, and it would pretty much perfectly fit that bill. And of course, the most recent one, Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey. And the most annoying bit about those specific two examples, God of War Ragnarok and Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey, people will use the whole, oh, but it's fiction and myth, bro, who cares? Here's the thing. Those myths and those stories were told in a certain time period, and are also set in that said time period. In the case of Norse mythology, it's quite literally unfolding right after Attila the Hun. And for those who do not know, Attila the Hun is mentioned 5 times in Norse myth. 4 times he actually appears in myths, and the 5th time he's just straight up named by the Allfather Odin. And with Angrboda in God of War Ragnarok, they made her into a black African woman, which makes no sense because of the geography of Scandinavia and the fact that Scandinavia is nowhere near Africa. And of course, everyone will use the whole Cheddar Man thing until you realize that 1, It was quite literally a processing error of that 3D image. And two, it was astroturfed into fucking oblivion because the actual skin tone of Cheddar Man would have actually been more so comparable to like modern day Greeks or Arabs. In other words, he was way more lighter in skin color than the average African. And then there's Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey, and this one really pisses me off because, again, people are using the whole fiction and myth thing. You wanna know why it's so fucking stupid for them to say that? One, Troy was a real city. There are actual ruins of Troy in the Anatolian steppe, aka modern day Turkey. And then there's the fact that figures such as Odysseus, Agamemnon, and Helen of Troy, they were real figures. Their castles and palaces were real. There are actual ruins of those said buildings in Greece right now. And then there's the Helen of Troy bit. People were like, oh, but the description of the Helen of Troy is vague in like Homer's writings, so intentionally so, completely ignoring the fact that there are sculptures of Helen of Troy from that time, and here is how she looks. She's pale-skinned, or in other words, fair-skinned. She has strawberry blonde hair and blue eyes, and of course she also has an hourglass figure, since that, again, that is a part of the conventional beauty standard to have an hourglass shape. And then there's the whole, skin color thing, and we all know why. Wokeness hates Europeans. It hates any form of whiteness. It is an anti-white ideology, and it's why I constantly laugh my ass off whenever people mention woke right, and I will get into that reason for a bit, but until then, I'm just gonna take a bit of a break. You won't notice it because of how I will edit the video. The term woke right absolutely makes no sense, mainly because of how the people use that term. They're like, oh, you care about European history? You're woke right. Oh, you actually want European myths to be accurate? Woke right. Oh, so you want media that has, beautiful and sexy characters to actually have a bit more of a meaning instead of just being goon slop? Woke right. It makes no sense, mainly because they are, quite frankly, comparing you to a Nuzzi and a Fascismos, even though most people don't even believe in that ideology. And the reason why it also makes no sense in that high regard is because of one thing. Fascismos and Nuzism, they are pro-white ideologies. They are for Europeans, by Europeans. Meanwhile, wokeness, it's an anti-white ideology. It hates European history, it hates European culture, it hates European mythology, and it hates Europeans in general down to a racial level. Like, they hate them, but most of the people who tend to say woke right either don't understand, or in the case of people like Mark Levin, especially since we know what group he's a part of, them, but pretty much for the normies, or as we more schizotypes would call them, the goyim. They don't know what it means because they never even delved deep into Nuzzi ideology, nor did they even dive deep into wokeness and its earliest origins being founded within the whole cultural Marxist theory that was in practice during the Weimar Republic, which we all saw how well that went. And in the case of Mark Levin, he's a little subversive fuck. That's it. But for people like Dexter Midnight, which for those who do not know, he's some furry gooner who also throws around that label of woke right. He clearly doesn't understand what woke means, nor does he even understand what true right-wing means, and it's mainly because people like him and the rest of the quote anti-woke crowd are the exact same as the people who they rail against. Because ultimately, they're both materialists. That's what they are. The anti-woke crowd, they don't really give a damn about historical accuracy. In fact, I'm betting that if you were to make a film about a historical figure, and it has no sense of historical accuracy, but if it happens to be a good piece of media, they won't care, because it's just entertainment, and they will enjoy the goy slop. And for the anti-woke crowd, they don't really care about the media that they quote-unquote support, because they will consume goy slop such as Has Been Hotel or Hell of a Boss, because we all know why, especially in relation to Has Been Hotel. They love that gay Spider-Man. They love that. But ultimately, they are the same. There's really no sense of soul in the media that they consume, and there's really no sense of purpose as to what they're doing. Really, the whole culture war is a propaganda civil war between two groups of materialists, the anti-woke and the woke. They're both ultimately the same, especially since that most modern day Republicans and conservatives are just the Democrats of the 1960s to the 1990s. And that means they are ultimately the same as the left. And I say it's better to make your own media. And so far people have been agreeing with me. In fact, I watched Synthetic Man's video on the Halo 1 demake, and he said that, yeah, people have to make their own media if we do not want to see this shit continue any longer. And as someone who has constantly said that, when I watched it, I was like, yes, finally, someone else is also saying it. But anyway, that's all I have to say. Have a good day.